lots of ministry leaders are watching this, our talk together. All of us have seen a bad succession.
Right.
Everybody has. In fact, it's normally hard to find a good one. And maybe we can unpack that a little bit about what that looks like. And it is one of the most gut-wrenching feelings when the succession doesn't go right in a leader's heart, in their life, in their emotions. It is also one of the most rewarding things. Is when you at some point pass off this baton and someone takes what God's done through you and takes it to another level. You almost feel like the words of David, like, I can die now. Like he served his generation and he died.
Right.
And we have a small part to play in the grand scheme of God's mission.
Hey, welcome to Leaders Seminary, where we talk about navigating life and leadership through a theological lens. On this episode, I am joined by a close friend and a great leader, Dr. Glen Wolf. Dr. Glen Wolf serves as the executive pastor at City Church, and he is the brand new author of his first book called Switch Point: The Effective Transfer of Church Leadership, in which he shares his expertise on one of ministry's most critical junctures, pastoral succession. With over a decade of friendship and insight, we dive into a conversation that promises to enlighten leaders on navigating this pivotal transition with grace and purpose. Let's jump into the episode now with Dr. Glen Wolf. Hey, everyone. Welcome back to the Leaders Seminary channel. We're so glad that you're here. As I said in the intro, I've got one of my good friends, Dr. Glen Wolf, here with me today, and excited about the conversation. Dr. Wolf, welcome to the Leaders Seminary, man.
Yes, I'm so excited to be here. Love you so much. Grateful for our relationship and excited to spend a few minutes with you and the leaders that are watching this.
Absolutely. Yeah, man. It's probably, I probably should have had you as the first person on. So I apologize for that.
Yeah, I am offended. So we'll work through that. Maybe we'll switch and talk about that now.
Hey, but you're here now, right? We don't live in the past.
That's right.
In the present. God
come on
us in the future. So we're here, man. Talking about our relationship. Dr. Glen, who when I first met him was just Pastor Glen, and honestly, he knows this, but he was really one of the inspirations for me to pursue my doctorate outside of, my pastor and wife and immediate close family, because, our stories have kind of paralleled each other as we've gone through. And Dr. Wolf was the very first person outside of the church that I met when I moved to Orlando 13 years ago. I don't know if you remember this, but it was back in the day where social media wasn't really that big. It wasn't a thing. There's probably like seven people on social media. So it was, you had to still go out. And if you were going to do an event, you had to send people out. We did, I think, mailers or something like that. But showing up to other churches, and Dr. Glen had two of his youth leaders. They came to our church, and I think I had been here maybe like 3 weeks. So I'm like, oh yeah, there's other churches around. That's awesome. And definitely, I think we brought a couple kids. We only had a couple kids, so we probably brought the whole youth group at that point. And went to, at that point, I think it was Wide Open was the name of the ministry. And so, and we met and have had a friendship ever since, man. I don't know if you recall any of that, but I was thinking about that.
Yeah. And I'm sure I inspired you to get your doctorate because you realized that if I can do it, you definitely could do it. So
he's a humble man, folks. So definitely grateful for your friendship, your prayers over the years, and just your golf lessons. That's right. One of the secret things that people that know you know that you're a scratch golfer, maybe even semi-pro, if not pro. You could probably play pro, right?
There's no way. There's absolutely no way I could. But in my mind, I'd like to think I can. So, I
Yeah,
don't know what that's worth. But yes, I have a passion for golf, and
he's
yeah,
amazing.
and you're getting better and better and better all the time.
Yeah, well, it's your tips. So, speaking of tips, watch this transition. We're going to talk about your first book, brand new book that's out based on your dissertation and your research. And I think it's one of the most helpful things for leaders, for pastors, and even for um, everyday Christians, for lack of better words, because I think at some point, and I'll let you get into this later, there's transitions that we all go through. And if there is a resource out there to help us, I think it's important. So your brand new book, Switch Point, The Effective Transfer of Church Leadership, is out. It's out worldwide. People can get it anywhere. There'll be a link in the description below, but kind of give us a 40,000-foot viewpoint of why you wanted to do this type of research, why the book is necessary, and maybe like your heart behind it.
Yeah, absolutely. And thanks for the time. I remember I was about 15 years old and I was about to live out my dream. And ever since I was 5 years old, my dream was to play in the varsity state final in
Yeah.
high school. And so I'm a freshman in high school. I'm so excited. I'm in the locker room, lacing up my shoes. I got acne all over my face. My heart's beating so fast, I could barely eat lunch that day. I mean, this was the culmination of everything I cared about. So we get out in the layup line. I'm so excited. We get through the first quarter and we win it by a little bit.
Yeah.
We get done with the second quarter and we win it by a few. The third quarter, we actually won the third quarter by just a few, but we lost the fourth quarter. And even though we won the first three quarters, because of how bad we lost the fourth quarter, we actually lost the game.
Wow.
And if we don't watch it as leaders, the same thing is possible for you and I. We can win our first quarter. We can club it in our second quarter. We can do great in our third quarter. But if we lose that fourth quarter bad, we potentially can lose the game. And you can argue back and forth. What does it mean to lose the game in the ministry life? I would just say if ministry stopped with you, that if what God has done in you kind of goes to your grave, if you will. And we've all seen leaders experience that. And so I just have developed a really big heart to see leaders win their fourth quarter. And I also want to see leaders win their first quarter.
Yeah.
And so the book unpacks that. I got into this dissertation academically. And, you're supposed to write something that's never been written, right? I mean, that's kind of the idea of a doctorate. And so as I started to think about what to write on, I started asking senior leaders and say, hey, what's your plan after leaving, senior leading? And most of them had no plan. And then very few, would regurgitate their bylaws a little bit. All of a sudden I go, whoa, this is an untapped thing. I'm not talking about leaders that don't know what they're doing. I'm talking about high caliber, great leaders, organizational leaders, and they had no plan. And so as I started to study it more and more and more, I realized that has tended to be the case. And here's what I found. At worst, pastoral successions fail. And at best, they get through it with a ton of regret. That's what I see.
Yeah.
And so I want to help as many leaders as possible not only be successful in pastoral transition, but do it with as little regret as possible. You and I know there's no perfect transition. There's no perfect succession. A part of life is that we will look back and regret some things we did. Yeah. But I would argue that if you walk through this early enough, it potentially can be one of the most rewarding seasons of your life. And I think all of us, lots of ministry leaders are watching this, our talk together. All of us have seen a bad succession.
Right.
Everybody has. In fact, it's normally hard to find a good one. And maybe we can unpack that a little bit about what that looks like. And it is one of the most gut-wrenching feelings when the succession doesn't go right in a leader's heart, in their life, and their emotions. It is also one of the most rewarding things is when you at some point pass off this baton, and someone takes what God's done through you and takes it to another level. You almost feel like the words of David, like, I can die now. Like he served his generation and he died. Like,
Right.
and we have a small part to play in the grand scheme of God's mission.
Yeah.
And so, man, it's so exciting to see already as I've started consulting churches over this last year. Man, there's been tears, there's been emotions, but overall, man, it's been such a blessing to see transitions unfold.
Yeah.
And pastoral successions happen. And, in the book I unpack it, and everybody can, I don't want to spend too much time probably unpacking what somebody could read, but Absolutely. We all know that right now, currently as this is being spoken, 10,000 baby boomers are still retiring every day right now. It's been going on for, 7 years or 8 years. It's still going to continue. This is the issue.
Right.
It is the issue. The average age pastor in America is a little bit on the bottom side of 60s. Mm-hmm. I know our fellowship, the Assemblies of God, my own section, it's about 60. There's just I know this sounds really bad and this might be morbid, and you can delete this later if you'd like to, but chances are that most of the lead pastors in America today in 10 years will not be in that position. Wow. In fact, the stats say that in the next 10 years, 480,000 churches are going to transition the lead pastor position. And the stats are that 9 out of 10 of them will do so with no plan in place. They're just going to do it.
Wow.
And there's just too much at stake.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Your reputation, your congregation, and I think most importantly, the mission of God continuing in your local church. It's not about us, right? And so, man, it's just I love talking about it. I love being in this circle. I love the fact that even already, just the hundreds of texts I've received from pastors saying, thank you. I remember the first time I finally launched the book, and I did a talk at a conference about it. I had a woman come up to me afterwards, and she was older, and she was sobbing. She came up, she hugged me, and she said, if I would have had this book 10 years ago, we may have not lost our congregation, and we may have not lost our property.
Wow.
And she just said, man, everybody needs this book. And what I'm surprised about is that this is the type of book, and I'm not the only one that's talking about it, but yeah, this is the type of book that you really need to read decades before that transition. And so, here's the thing. Every person watching right now is in a succession.
Right.
And simply define, you can define it a bunch of different ways, but it's that you are going to hand off your responsibility to someone else. I mean, whatever that looks like. So if you're a youth pastor today, you're not going to be the last youth pastor. If you're a dream team leader, a volunteer, a parking lot attendant, and this works in the corporate world too. It doesn't make a difference what position you're in.
Yeah.
Mario, we both have kids. We are in a succession.
Absolutely.
We are. And so, if I ever get a talk with people, I would always challenge them to say something like this. Say, there will be a day where I'm going to hand off my position and my authority and my responsibility to someone else.
Absolutely.
And when you start to think that way now, it actually helps you lead better today. Right.
Yeah.
Because then all of a sudden, like, if you talk lead pastors or something, let's just talk that for a second. LED lights and LED walls and the greatest sound system or whatever, or a social media system or not, or whatever. And I'm not saying none of those are important. All I'm saying is when you start thinking about the final day, when you're going to hand off what matters most, it forces you to all of a sudden prioritize today. By God, I need to instill the things because that day is coming, right? So when I think about succession for myself, it humbles me to realize that this isn't all about me.
Right.
And it forces me to care about what matters most.
Yeah. No, man, I think just hearing those numbers is very staggering, right? And I love it because this is Leaders Seminary, right? So we want to go deep, but we also want to be practical. And I love that I think you said 10,000 baby boomers are retiring every single day. which is staggering to me just to see how big that generation is. And it seems like even how big they are, there's the generations behind keep getting bigger and bigger and bigger. Obviously, we know there's more people in the world now than there ever has been. That number just keeps going up. But then the other shocking statistic to me that you just said was 480,000 churches will transition.
Yes, and 9 out of 10 of them will do so with no transition plan.
Wow. So let me ask you this. I'm not sure if it was in your research or a question that you've thought about. I know I've read the book, but my memory isn't that great. So let me just ask you to see if it's helpful to other people. If we know, like you said, this may be on the more morbid side, right? But just practically speaking, we all know that at some point we're going to die, right? We all know at some point, even that we're going to retire, especially in America, right? That's the mindset: work till you retire, which is a whole different type of discussion that we talk about. But so, like you said, there's transition coming. Why do you think 9 out of 10 churches don't think about that or don't have a plan in place if it's something we all know is going to happen?
Yeah, great question. I'll do my best to answer it, even though I'm sure that's a holistic answer to really get it. So a couple things. First of all, we have not seen it done well. So the current lead pastors, especially those that have planted and founded churches, they did not take it over, and so they've never actually experienced it themselves. Second thing is that our constitution and bylaws are typically, here's what happens, Mario, and I don't know about in your circle, but in our circle, if we're honest, what we typically do is we borrow a church that we trust and we copy and paste their bylaws into ours. And
the church copies and pastes things?
It's called copyright, the right to copy. That's what it means. That's why I use your sermons every Sunday. So anyway.
That's funny.
So constitution and bylaws is a big deal. For instance, most of the Assemblies of God churches, if I can talk about that section, which is what I know the most and I'm around the most, they typically have a congregational vote. Typically the process is that a pastor would then put in his or her 2 weeks, and then the board that is unequipped would all of a sudden become a search committee. They would get a search committee, and then the best preacher wins. I mean, that is typically how it's done. And then typically the outgoing pastor now has to leave town. This is this is normally how that goes.
Okay.
And then the new pastor many times will come in and reboot, just get all new staff. And
that sounds more like a college football transition than a church transition. That's the first thing that pops in my head, but yeah.
Yeah, so it's wild because when you look in the New Testament, Paul would not understand our use of search committees because he would be, challenging us to have spiritual sons and spiritual daughters.
Right.
So that's its own challenge in itself.
Absolutely.
Is that you have an older generation that has failed. Not all. There are great leaders out there, so I don't want to act like they're not. And we got some exceptional outgoing leaders. But there are current lead pastors that have a difficult time seeing themselves as spiritual parents. And so their own insecurities will not let this new person lead well.
Yeah.
And then you have a younger generation that tends to be more entitled and tends to not honor as well or stick around as well.
Absolutely.
And so, man, I've talked a lot about going leaders where they're like, man, on their end, they invested into a leader for 3 to 4 years and then they bolted. They went to the next church and all of a sudden they were going, I thought that was my guy or my girl, and it wasn't. And so I've seen the challenge on both ends.
Yeah.
And obviously each church has its own specific context.
Absolutely.
There.
Yeah. And I think that spills over a little bit even to the research that I did and the commodification of leadership, the commodification of the church, and this whole ethos that we have taken on from the corporate world instead
Yeah.
of leading from a biblical and theological understanding, right? And nothing wrong with corporate leadership, nothing wrong with
Yep.
corporate structure. I think there are things that we can glean from, but where you start matters. And,
Yes.
especially in, I can only speak to the American church, right? Because, we're not in Europe, we're not in Africa, we're not in Asia, we're not in the global South, but we have switched the foundation from where we glean spiritual insights from, and they're more corporate than they are, theological, which is the whole point of this platform. And so I'm glad that you brought that. That's a great point. And as you're talking, I can definitely see that. And like you said, nothing. I know your heart, and hopefully people know my heart. Like, we love the church. We
Yeah.
love God's people. We're part of God's people. And so when pointing out things that are wrong, it's not to bash the church. It's to say, hey, listen, this is where we're missing the mark here. And if we can hopefully do these things, it can bring the needle back to the center, to where we can continue to see, God's kingdom expand, not just in
Amen.
our generation, but in the generations to come.
That's
So,
right. Yeah. And even to follow up on that. So senior leaders, current lead pastors, they don't know, they haven't been modeled what ministry looks like beyond the lead pastor position, because their generation before went until they pretty much died.
for sure.
And so that's probably its own whole session.
Absolutely.
But
Excuse me.
when leaders can realize that it's just the closing of a chapter, it doesn't mean that they're done. In fact, so even as I'm working with churches, I don't only talk about succession, we also talk about transition.
Yeah.
And transition would be that the lead pastor would hand off his or her position to a new lead pastor, but still have a place at the table and still have a seat on the bus. When I did my research, this was really surprising. My thesis going in was that the most successful transitions are when the outgoing pastor hands it off and leaves.
Okay.
I just thought for sure he or she can't stick around. Like, the new person coming in, they're going to be comparing all the time and they won't have their place. What I found with my research was just the opposite. That if the outgoing pastor sticks around, here's the key: with clarity.
Yeah.
With clarity.
Yep.
It actually can be extremely helpful. So if you just think about it for a second, let's just say, I'm our executive pastor. Let's say my lead pastor hands the church to me next week. All right. Which isn't the plan, but let's say he does.
Yeah. Prophesy.
Well, just a couple practical things here. Number one is that people give because they love Jesus.
Yep.
Okay. They believe in the mission of your local church. And number three, because they trust your lead pastor.
Right.
That's the reality.
That's good. Yeah.
It's just the truth. So why would I want the most credible person in my church exiting on my first day in new leadership?
Yeah. Good point.
I mean, just on a practical part. And when I think about the scriptures, Paul with spiritual fathers and spiritual sons, like in our situation, if I could just talk about us, where I'm at City Church, our pastor is an incredible leader. He founded our church. We're going on 25 years next year. We're going to go crazy.
Wow.
Why should he potentially spend 25 years investing into a local church and then have to leave it as if he did something wrong?
Right.
Like, is that kingdom?
Yeah. Yeah.
Now listen, as I consult churches, not every leader is wired to stick around. Okay. So yeah. I'm not saying it's a one size fit all. I'm not saying that not every personality can handle it. Every church has its own context. But I think the most honoring thing to do would be able that the spiritual dad can still be around. In fact, when I was studying a couple of the churches and my research in the book, one of them even said, I told my spiritual dad, he told him, I don't want the job if you're not here. Like, you're my spiritual dad. Like, how would I not want you here? Like, that just doesn't make sense to me, So
Yeah.
With clarity, though. Where it
Yeah.
gets messed up is when people are unclear about who's doing what and where they're going. And
Absolutely.
that can be a great challenge.
Man, no, that's a really, really great point. And like you said, clarity looks different depending on your context. And I think that's what's
Very
important.
good.
I think that's what's important. And I think, even in your book, right, you're giving what I would consider frameworks for churches
Sit.
to use. You're not saying, hey, this is how you have to do it. You're
Correct.
saying, hey, here are the keys to what effective transition looks like. And for example, making sure there's clarity, right? So maybe there's pastor emeritus. Maybe there is, you want to, we're in Orlando, Florida, Lake Mary, area, technically Longwood, but everybody sees this part of Central Florida as Orlando, right? So,
Mm-hmm. Yep.
maybe you're a pastor in Orlando. Yeah, you want to stick around. You want to preach every still 5 weeks. You want to do that. That may work out. Your pastor may say, hey, I'm going to Naples and I'm not going to see y'all ever again. And that may work, so I love that point, that clarity is what matters, because at the end of the day, nobody likes confusion. I don't care if it's a leader.
Yes.
I don't care if it's a mom that's sitting in the pew or chair or, whatever you have in your church. They want to know, like you said, hey, what's going on? Ultimately, as a excuse me, human being, am I going to be okay through this? I think is the question that people are asking. Is the church going to be okay? And making sure there's clarity is vitally, vitally important. I love that. And that can apply to, like you said, to anybody in any transition, no matter what you're doing in life. But man, that's so good. What else would you say are some other keys to transition, both from, because I've thought about it, right? Like, obviously, there is an older woman or man that is the lead pastor, senior pastor that's transitioning, but in younger that's coming up. And, both of us are, associate pastor, executive pastor. So we're in the younger side, and it's easier to think about it from your side only. Right. So
that's right. Yeah.
what are some of the other points that you would, without giving away everything in the book, because we want people to go and read the book, and then Dr. Glen would never push himself, but we also want you to consult with Dr. Glen. Listen, he can't take on everybody. He's one man, but he would love to help you through it. But what are some of those other key points when we think about transition? Because it is vitally important. Every single one of us is going to have to do it.
Yeah. So in the book, I talked through 7 steps for the outgoing pastor. So if you're even thinking remotely that at some point you're going to hand off your lead pastor position, you should get this book and at least start reading it now. You may be 5 years away, 10 years away, but some of the things just can change overnight. And so then I have a section about if someone taps you on the shoulder and says, hey, I think you're next, what do you do? Like, where do you start? How do you negotiate that? How do you talk to your family about that? And I help you kind of step by step walk through those processes. So yeah, on the outgoing side, step 1 on both ends, but if you're an outgoing pastor, step 1 is that ensure that you and your family are spiritually and emotionally healthy. So I'm working with a church right now, and they're ready to get into transition plans like right away. I mean, they're like, hey, next week, just show. And I'm like, whoa. Yeah. And Sam Chan is a great mentor to me. He always says things don't go wrong. They typically start wrong. And so we just got to back up and I want to slow down and go, guys, you need to understand this is the most emotionally draining thing you're gonna potentially do. Another church that I'm working with right now, he just emailed me back. He said, Pastor Glen, I'm so grateful for you. He said, this is the hardest thing we've ever done.
Yeah.
Period. I mean, that's how he ended his email. It is just, I've seen leaders raise $20 million for missions and buildings and all that stuff, and they would get done with their succession and say that was by far much harder than anything else I've ever done. It's just so emotional.
Yeah.
And especially for the spouse, a lot of times what happens is that the spouse isn't included in the conversations. And so typically the main leader ends up in the boardroom, the main leader ends up with the consultant, et cetera. One of the practical things I do when I'm consulting churches is that I actually put the spouse and the husband or wife or whatever, I put us all in a group text. So every time I'm texting the main leader, he or she is also included because they have to process this emotionally.
Yeah.
One of the very first church I ever consulted, when I walked through just my plan with them, the pastor's wife broke out in tears. We almost had to stop the Zoom call. And she said, for the first time, I feel like this is actually going to work.
Wow.
And she's like, I've never seen a good succession. I've never been a part of a good succession, but I feel like it's going to work. And I'm like, by God's grace, it is going to work, but all I'm saying is it is extremely emotional. And here's the challenge. If you're an outgoing leader right now and you go into a succession narrative and you're unhealthy spiritually or emotionally, it's only going to get multiplied. It's only going to get amplified.
Yeah.
So if you're a little bitter with your board, it's going to come out. If you feel a little dishonored by your staff or your congregation or whatever, if you've got some resentment inside of you, it's going to come out.
Yeah.
And here's when I'm coaching outgoing pastors, here's the key. So let's say it's a male leader for a second. All right. So if I'm talking to a man pastor, I would say, okay, your spouse needs leadership from you. Your board needs leadership from you. You need leadership from you. Your family needs leadership from you. Your congregation needs leadership from you. You also need to figure out what you're doing next and what you're moving to, because God's not done with you.
Right.
What's most important in that moment? It's you. You're the key to all of those things going well.
Right.
And if you don't get yourself right, that's when leaders start to do like herky jerky stuff. They get a year into the transition plan and all of a sudden they're pulling the plug and now we're 2 more years out. And
right.
I'm telling you, I've seen it.
Yeah. No,
a lot of it gets back to this emotional health. And post-COVID, this is a big deal.
Absolutely. I mean, man, I didn't mean to cut you off there, but I think, there are always defining moments in our life. But one of the things that I uncovered when I was doing my research is that the way that we define generations is by a generation defining moment, right? And so COVID is Gen Z's specifically one of their generation defining moments, but it's one of those moments that will define all generations because it is, not to steal your book title, but a switch point for everybody. And the emotional freight that we were all carrying before COVID got exacerbated during COVID and continues after COVID. And, for everybody, obviously it was very difficult, but I just know even for us, like the changes that we had to make on the fly as church was so hard and so emotionally draining that even me just personally, I feel like just now it's like having time to think about it and recover from it. At the time that this video is being recorded, it's 3 years later. So we're in 2023. And so, older pastors and leaders, it was, just, hey, listen, I just can't do this, and if they did survive, now it's like you said, the moment where it's like, all right, how can I turn this over as fast as possible? And, we need to, what I'm hearing from you and something I would encourage everybody to do is, all right, let's see where we're at emotionally. Let's see where we're at spiritually and health wise. And let's take the time to get healthy if we need to. And that way, whenever the baton is passed, the
Yeah.
legacy continues. Because I feel like, and correct me if I'm
Yeah.
wrong, that's one of the other big issues that particularly the outgoing pastor may be facing, is that, you know, I've done all this work, like you said, 25 years,
Mhm.
30 years. I mean, my pastor has been in ministry for 40 plus years now. And it's like, you know, what am I leaving behind? Right. Like,
Mhm.
it's different than, again, a corporate situation. I know that, you know, if you are the founder and CEO of a business, you know, you obviously are wanting to build something to leave behind, but your personal identity is not necessarily wrapped up in that. And I think, you know,
That's
for
right.
a lot of pastors, whether good or bad, you know,
Yep.
is a different conversation. Whenever we're doing something for the Lord or for the kingdom, a lot of times our personal aspirations or identities are tied in that, which may make it harder during that transition. Is that something that you found, or?
Yeah, absolutely. And we all know that. Yeah. We forget that pastor is not our first name.
Hmm.
You know, we got to do a better job of that. You know, when it comes to the emotions, I heard one guy talk about it, that when the feeling that an outgoing pastor feels when they hand it off to this new leader and the congregation starts to love this new leader, he made it, he used this analogy. He said it's almost like your wife is dating another man in front of you
Oh my,
and she likes it.
yeah. Wow.
I'm like, yeah.
That's powerful.
So it's so emotional. And so one other thing I would say that has emerged as I've just kind of talked with leaders, chatted with leaders, processed all this is, you know, the sigmoid curve. And I don't know how to do this with my hand real well, but you know, the life
Yeah.
cycle of a
Yeah.
organization goes on over there we go. It goes up and down, and then you got to renew in order to
Uh-huh.
keep going up and to the right. Right. So typically what outgoing leaders do is that they don't have the personal aha moment that it's time to transition until their church is either at plateau or
Mm.
it's starting to decline. And then all of a sudden they go, whoa, 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 whoa. Maybe I need to make a move.
Wow.
And the challenge is that at that point, then you call me, and now we have a way bigger issue.
Yeah.
Now we're not just trying to transition something healthy. Now we're trying to revive something. And then we're also wanting to honor you, but the thing's in decline. It just, many leaders, they don't set themselves up well to win that fourth quarter because they wait too long to even have the conversation around what it looks like.
Yeah.
And at the minimum, if you're there today as a leader, I would encourage you to buy this book. There's other books like it, but at least just wrap your brain around what all this entails, because you know, step one for me for outgoing leaders is ensure that you and your family are spiritually and emotionally healthy. Step two is get your finances in order and figure out what your next mission is. You
So,
can't do that overnight.
right.
You just can't. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, so
Sermon prep.
yeah. And then step three would be then get your structure right. Figure out your bylaws if they need to change, if they need to be updated. Get this thing prepared for the next few decades
Mm.
on your leadership dime, not on the incoming pastor's leadership dime.
Yeah. Awesome. And so then for the, we got a couple more minutes here for the, that's for the outgoing pastor. Different things for the incoming transitional leader.
Yeah. So step one is still the same. That it will be way more harder than you think. You do not know that a succession is successful until the third year.
Wow.
All right. So as the incoming pastor is even just trying to think through, you know, right away you just want to get a sermon under your belt that didn't bust. You know what I'm saying? Like you're just trying to get a series, and hopefully the giving doesn't go crazy. But I mean, come on, let's be honest. Like, yeah,
Hey.
you got the space side of you, and then the other part of you, you're just going, can I just keep this thing going for a little while here with no craziness, you know, as
Absolutely.
I'm in the new leader. So at first, you know, typically, you know, you're going to think through your first 90 days. Obviously, the basic stuff is, you know, don't change a bunch of things. Honor the thunder out of everything you can. In my book, I would talk about that both sides, the outgoing pastor and the incoming pastor, when there's a kind of an overlap. I love that because what you want to make sure is that the outgoing pastor is handing off key leaderships to you. So That's key givers, that's key leaders, and that's also key players in the community.
Yeah.
For instance, if you have a relationship that you built with the principal of a local high school for 15 years, you need to make sure that you have time in this handoff to actually have that lunch with both you. It's just, all that stuff takes time, but it's so worth it. It's so valuable because we don't need all this ending with you. We want this thing to be passed on to the next generation. So, you would be wanting to make sure that asking questions about honor, how this got to where it got to, is incredibly important. You do not know if this thing is going to work until the third year. So if I can unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, let's do it.
So think about it. Let's say, the outgoing pastor did a good job and said, hey, let's talk about your board for a second. So ideally, you would like, if you brought me in, what I would be challenging the church with is to figure out what board members will work for the new leader. And I think that the outgoing pastor should make the appropriate changes on his or her leadership change in their pocket, if you will, so that the incoming leader does not have to make a bunch of changes their first 90 days or first 6 months.
Yeah, that's great.
That's not always possible. That doesn't always work out. But either way, however it works, at some point, the current board is going to commit to not rocking the boat during the transition. They're going to say, yes, for the next 2 years, I'm locked in and I'm not, or next year, or whatever they decide, 18 months. But they're all committed to this transition, right? The outgoing pastor is probably going to say something on his or her final day, is, say something like, hey, church, let's give this guy, love him. And I love him, and I believe in them, and can everybody, let's give the next 6 months or a year or whatever, right? You would be saying some of those things.
Yeah.
Well, at some point after a year or two, that board feels like, okay, this is now established. And then they're going to make a renewal commitment to either jump into this for the long haul, or they're going to feel released to let go. Here's why. Because they didn't really commit to you. They committed to their commitment.
Yeah.
And that's not a bad thing. Sometimes transitions need new leadership. Like none of that's bad. Once again, I'm wanting to help leaders live with fewer regrets. So I'm not saying that leadership changes don't need to be made. I'm saying let's make sure that we make them intentionally.
Absolutely.
And purposefully, and not accidentally.
Right.
Because that's where the conversation can get really challenging. So so I would suggest even the second or third year that leaders would read Sam Chan's Leadership Pain book. I think it would be good for you, because you're going to feel it. That's why you just got to make sure your heart's ready, your spouse's emotions are ready. I don't know about you. People can say a lot of bad things about me or have critics about me, but you start talking about my wife and I'm ready to lose it, and vice versa. So, for your spouse, they've got to be coached and prepped. And that's really your role as the leader of that family to help them be prepared for that.
Yeah.
And I got to tell you though, on the other side of it though, it's so exciting.
Yeah.
Most incoming leaders, they jump the gun on vision. They jump the gun on vision. So, is there a perfect scenario to that? I don't have one. I think you got to read the room, and sometimes leaders got to make a decision.
Absolutely.
You know what I'm saying? There's sometimes where you just got to get up, put that rod in the air and say, everybody, this is where we're moving. And I'm not going to spend a year massaging this. This is what we're doing. Let's go. Right. Let's go take a mountain. Let's go somewhere. And are you going to ruffle some feathers? Absolutely. And leadership does that, right? Leadership creates an amount of chaos, right? We comfort the afflicted and we afflict the comfortable, right? So that gets into just even assessing where the church is,
right?
Trying to get an idea of the culture, the strengths of it, et cetera. And can I say one more thing?
Absolutely.
When I'm coaching an incoming leader to start to dream about what the future of that church would look like, here's how I would frame it. I wish I had a PowerPoint to show you or something, but I would, if there was a pie chart and there was 33% each section, okay?
Yep.
I would say that as you think about vision of your future church, here's how I would like you to frame it. 33% of it should be the personality and anointing of the senior leader. Okay, so remember, this isn't your church, this is the Lord's church.
Yeah.
And so we have to ask the question, why did God bring this person to be our leader now?
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
So what can happen is that if churches get too unhealthy is when they only center it around the senior leader.
Yep.
And that doesn't create a good culture.
Right.
But we also don't want to dismiss the anointing that's on the senior leader. The 133rd Psalm is really clear. That Psalm says that it runs from the head to the body. That's what it says. So there's no way we can't say that the anointing of God doesn't go through our senior leader. So right away we go, okay, who is our senior leader? What are their passions? What are their giftings? What is their personality? That should help shape our vision. The other one is who's in the room, who's in the congregation. So we all go, okay, God, why did you bring Mario Hood to be here for this season?
Right.
And you can find a lot of his will for the future of the church based off of who's bringing around you.
Yeah, that's
now,
good.
I'm not talking about a congregational led church where all of a sudden we do a poll and they all get to decide what the future looks like. I'm not saying that at all. All I'm saying is that you'll see, you'll find people that have a heart for generosity, or they have a heart for missions, or they got a heart for what burdens them. They are a part of the body just as much as the senior leader is part of the body. Right.
Absolutely.
And then the third part of that little triangle there is the needs of the community.
Yeah.
And so I would challenge the incoming leader to think through that. God, how have you wired me? Because they don't need to be somebody not, and they don't need to be the last pastor, or else the last pastor should still be there.
Right.
So God, right? I mean, so God, you've anointed me for this season. What are you doing in me? God, who have you brought into our congregation? And what are the needs in our community today that may have not been there 10 years ago?
Yeah. No, man, I think those are three amazing insights to have, especially as a incoming leader. And, as you were talking, I was just reminded, Moses, crossing the Red Sea, million plus people. Let's just go with that number. The people at the front of the line had a different perspective than the people at the back of the line.
So good.
And we always have to remember that, in leadership transition, even when you're leading people, the people at the front of the line crossed over way faster than the people at the back of the line that had Pharaoh and everybody chasing right after them. And, they got the pillar of fire there. But they didn't know they were safe, at the same time that the people in the front of the line knew they were safe. So we always have to remember, in that transition. And the second part of that, as you were talking, I was thinking, even when they got to crossing over into the land, like one tribe stayed back. So not everybody's going to cross over with you. So I love that when you said,
so good,
committed to their commitment, which is fine. That's good. And when that commitment is done, maybe they stay in, a different part. Maybe they don't cross over with you, but they still fight with you during that interim time. And so, man, that great insights. And, I highly encourage every leader, no matter what moment you're in right now, whether you think you're in transition, at some point you are going to be in transition. And one thing that we always encourage people, even in our church, like, you don't have to wait to a crisis to go see a counselor. Like,
that's right.
You can do preventative counseling or just healthy counseling, right? It's always good to talk to somebody, whether that's a pastor, whether that's a licensed, therapist, whether that's your spouse or, even with your kids, right? I encourage parents all the time, don't wait till your teenager or middle schooler does something wrong, right? Talk to them every day, like ask them, check up on them. Doesn't have to be a bad situation in order for you to have conversations. And that's what I want to encourage everybody as leaders, as pastors now, like, don't wait till there's a crisis that's going to maybe force transition before you start thinking about transition.
That's right.
That's what I love about your book. It's helpful no matter where you're at, but encourage you to get it now. So, man, I love this conversation. Before I let you go, tell the people what's the best way to follow you, contact you? Because I'm sure there's going to be people that watch this that just say, yeah, man, our church we're there, or we've been there, or I know we should have been there for a while. How can they, reach out to you, see if they can start a conversation?
Yeah, the best way is any social media platform. Dr. Glen Wolf on most social media platforms works. And to purchase the book, you can find it anywhere online where books are sold, or you can go to glenwolf.org, whatever works easier there. And my email is glen@citychurchfl.org if anybody wants to shoot that. But any of the social media stuff is out there, and love to have any conversations of any way that I can help. Leaders win.
Absolutely, man. Well, I appreciate you being here on the platform. Man, been a rich conversation. Looking forward to our next golf outing.
Come on.
I'm going to go hit up Top Golf before I come see you, just to get some good swings in. So I'm not too embarrassed.
Do it. The weather's nice here in Florida right now, so we better play.
Oh, man, it's so good. I walked out the other day and it was like 65. I was like, oh, man. I need a light little jacket, because we're
Floridians,
thin skin down here, but man, it felt good.
Absolutely.
Awesome, man. Well, I love you, man. We'll do this again, just to chop up this leadership stuff, because I've always loved your insights on leadership anyway. So appreciate you being here, and everybody go buy the book. Reach out to Dr. Glen if you need to, and we will see you on the next one.
Thanks.